Hey, yo. Welcome to Self Made Dad. It's Brian. Today, I wanted to talk about loneliness, in particular, why fathers don't talk to other fathers about stuff. It's crazy how infrequently men talk to people about things that they honestly need help with. And that sounds obvious, right? Oh, men don't really talk to other men. Men don't talk to people. They don't ask for help. But I just want to paint this picture real quick. 1 out of every 5 men have received emotional support from a friend in the last week or two. That's 20% of men have gotten support from a friend recently. That's ridiculous. Because I know as a father, I have gone through more than once a month or once a quarter level stress that honestly I could get and use some support on. Being a father makes that even worse, right? And I'll speak on it, man. So my son just turned 1. And so it's been interesting because that first year, I forgot how hard the first year of having a baby is. It's just really, 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 really hard. And it's not just hard because you have to wake up, you got to change diapers, you got to, deal with the middle of the night feedings and all that stuff. It's hard as a husband and it's hard as a father because you don't exist anymore. Nobody cares about you. When we had our first kid, my mom would call and the first thing out of her mouth wasn't, "How are you doing, son?" who I've raised for 30 something years. It's, "Let me see the baby." When my in-laws would come over, I'm shit you not, they came over one time and swim moved me to go see the baby. And then it just gets worse with the second kid because then there's the baby and then the little kid. And it's just a whole thing. It is tough. It is tough. It is tough. For those of us who, have a partner and enjoyed the process of making the baby, those bedroom activities go to nothing. And it's funny because I remember when I got married, one of my buddies pulled me aside, rice had just got done being thrown. And he pulls me aside. He's like, "Hey, Brian, man, I just want to talk to you real quick." I was like, "What's up, man?" He's like, listen. I'm really excited for you to be married. I've been married a few years. I just want you to know that sex ain't gonna be what it used to be. It's gonna be different. It's gonna be different. It's gonna be less frequent. And I was like, "Bro, why are you telling me this right now?" I just got married. He's like, "Listen, man, I just wish somebody had told me that." Nobody really told me that going into parenthood. It's just different. It's crazy. So it's hard. It's hard on fathers. We don't talk about this because it seems difficult. It's scary. And frankly, it's so burdensome to go through this alone that it creates a unique amount of stress on us as men and fathers that we could benefit from sharing, collaborating, venting with other people who get it, but we're not doing it. Only 1 out of 20 men are getting emotional support from friends. That's ridiculous. I was telling my wife the other day that parenting these 2 kids is so much harder, because of some of those dynamics that I talked about. And luckily, since we had the first kid, I have been blessed with having other men in my life who are around my age or a little older or a little younger, who have kids that are a little bit older than my kids, right? That's been helpful because I can look at them and see where we're going. And I can see oh man, when my kid's 10, these are the problems that they're going to deal with. Or when both of my kids are around in this age in school, my wife and I might struggle with this thing, having all this extra free time to ourselves and finding a way to relate again. There are all these things that come up that I am now blessed to be able to see ahead of and have people in my life that I can surround myself with and mentor me via apprenticeship without them even saying anything. It's been great. But not everybody has that. And that's a big, big problem. It's a big, sad problem. I saw the statistic that that people who are socially isolated, meaning they don't connect with friends, they aren't really sharing their full selves with each other, they run a 32% chance of dying early. For Black men, I think we live to about 74 or something like that. So that means that you run a 32% chance of dying at 60, 65, 70, just because you're lonely. That's ridiculous. I understand it. I understand that we're busy. I understand that we have responsibilities. I understand that when you're working, you don't have time to just be "Hey, let me talk about my feelings." But honestly, the important part of growing as a parent and as a father is to process and manage your own feelings so that you can show up to be the best kind of dad you can be, number 1. Number 2, so you don't inflict damage on your kids from your own trauma and emotional baggage that you are carrying and haven't addressed. Like, that's your responsibility. Do that stuff. So that being said, I've been sitting here like for a while asking myself, why don't men talk, right? The Surgeon General of the country, of the United States, has declared loneliness a nationwide epidemic. And, like USA Today, New York Times, like every publication has said like men are lonely. That's like the thing. That is a narrative that has been top of mind all year. And it's true. Like, it's honestly true. Why is it true though, right? Like, why are men so lonely? So I went and looked within on myself for this, and I was trying to understand, like, relate to the feeling of loneliness and why. Contextual point, I'm an only child. I grew up with a mother who worked nights as a nurse, with a father who, when they were still together, was never really emotionally present. He would just like come home from work and then just like watch TV and not talk to me. So I was just alone a lot. I was lonely by upbringing. Part of my genetic code now is don't be lonely. So I go like make friends like it's a profession. I build community like it's something that I do as an expertise. So I understand loneliness, but I also understand the tools with which to solve it. And I find that one of the things that a lot of guys, a lot of dads run into is the constructs of masculinity that society has taught them that will ultimately prevent them from opening up to other people and not being lonely. Said differently, being a man, being a tough man, being a strong man, being a passionate, a do-it-yourself man is killing men. You run a 32% chance of dying early if you're lonely. So by maintaining this ridiculous standard of manhood and masculinity that frankly has never really served us, it is killing us. That's a big hurdle that people are facing in approaching connection. Now, what does that mean? How does that manifest itself, right? So one of the examples that I was thinking about was how people struggle through grief and loss, right? I have a buddy who I know is going through a process of losing one of his close family members. It's a tale of two people, right? I've had one good friend who sat by his mother's bedside for 8 months while she died from cancer and carried the weight of the world and of his family on his shoulders. And one of the strongest men I know, and I watched him crack in every moment of that process, right? But I saw it because we would talk frequently. We would connect. We would share. He would try to tell people how he was doing so they wouldn't worry about him. But also, I was trying to help carry some of the load for him because that is a heavy load. And you compare that to my other buddy who right now I know is kind of doing the same thing with another family member. I only know this because I heard it through the grapevine from his partner that this was going on. And mind you, I'm in several text groups with this person. I have been in communication. I've seen this person in person a few times in the last month, and this has not come up once. Not once. And it's absurd. And I know that one of the core operating systems in his mind is I can't show weakness. I can't be weak. This is weakness. And so I'm not going to talk about it, which is absurd. I'm going to say it. It's absurd. Why? Because look, I have dealt with loss in the last year, right? I lost my father and I grieved about it. And so if nothing else, that person is losing out on an opportunity to connect with someone who can help give him the tools to logistically manage this process. Life insurance, money, burial procedures, contacting family, all that stuff, which is in itself just a lot. But also who has the tools to help them feel safe to process and feel the grief? How do I make peace with losing this person? What do I do in the moments of emptiness when I want to pick up the phone and call this person and they're not there? And guess what that does to his kids? It shows them that it is not okay to feel emotions. That it's only okay to be happy. That when you are in need, you are only allowed to figure it out yourself, which is a recipe for disaster. I don't know anybody who has started a business, who has had a family, who has raised kids, who has discovered some new scientific breakthrough, who has written books, who has not had help and support around them to achieve the goal. They've had mentors who've done the process before. They've had emotional support to help lift them up when their spirits are low and things get hard. That's what's necessary to be a good father. But men let being a man get in the way of that because they think they need to be tough. They need to be strong. They can never show weakness or be vulnerable. And that is killing us. And it's foolish. Because look, like one of the things that I talked about on another thing today was the value of having a business partner, right? I bought and sold a company over the last 5 years and, did it successfully, right? We made money. I did it with a business partner who was a little more experienced than me at this, who I have a great relationship with. And we still have a great relationship. And in the thick of it, when things got hard, when it felt like things were always like consistently going wrong and we had like difficult decision after difficult decision to make, I had a partner there, not only to think through logistics or be like, hey, you do this, I do that, but also with whom I could be like, man, I am not feeling this today. I am angry at this person. I am really sad or disappointed this didn't work out. I'm so stressed out. The weight of the world is on me. And we could trade the load back and forth. We could help each other with that. And he would tell me things like, oh, I think about it this way in the grand scheme so that I don't feel that stress anymore. Or I see it in this way, like when this happened with my last company, I've dealt with it this way. So I know that it can work out and I'm just giving it time to unfold. And it helped me reset my perspective on the situation and reframe it such that I was able to get through the hard time and make a better decision on the other side of it. That's because I was in partnership, I was in connection, I was in community with another person, and specifically in this instance, another man. He helped me with that. And the same is true of my fatherhood. I mentioned earlier that I am blessed to have these men in my life now who have kids who are a little older than mine. And I can look at where we're going, and even without them saying anything to me, I can be like, you know what? Oh man, when they get to second grade, when they get to sixth grade, when they get to high school, these are things I need to keep in mind. This is a risk that my kid might face. Dating, how they're dealing with it. How do I want to deal with it? Like, I haven't even thought about these kinds of contexts. In addition to the fact that I talk to these guys about my marriage, parenting, about things that I'm frustrated about feeling the pressure of providing and financial responsibilities, about my own insecurities. And you know what comes from that? Not losing something because I showed vulnerability, not people taking advantage of me because I showed a moment of weakness, not me, like getting stuck in the mud because, I was like in my emotions too much and feeling this thing for too long and worrying about my feelings. I made progress. I got help. And it's look, I know I've said this a lot. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. It's absurd because when I think about men who don't communicate about things they're struggling with other people, especially people in their friend group or community who have dealt with it before, I don't get it because they will very quickly reach out to a boxing coach or whatever when they're trying to figure out boxing. Or they'll say, oh, you know what, this person, like they're a president or an EVP of this thing, so I should talk to them. I'm gonna take their perspective seriously about my career. But when it comes to the inside stuff, in the heart or in the mind, they keep that to themselves. They don't share that they're feeling depressed or might be. They don't open up about the hard decisions they have to make about whether or not they should stay in a marriage or not. They don't open up about this realization that something their father did created a deep lasting wound in them that they just now realize was there and they're not sure how to process because it feels weak, because it's emotional, and we have been conditioned to ignore our emotions, to not cry, to only be strong or angry or stoic and not deal with that stuff. And that makes you stuck. You get help with all this other stuff. When you need to increase your power clean or you need to drop 10 pounds, you go get a coach for that or you get support for that, but then you don't get help for when your marriage is on the rocks. It's ridiculous. I think I might change the title of this episode to like, it's ridiculous, because this is all ridiculous shit. It's so ridiculous. This is coming from an experience that I had this week where this specific thing came up, and I did a poll on my Instagram stories asking what people wanted to talk about on this show. What kind of topics should we cover? And there was a diversity of things that ranged from like, let's talk about how to manage money, to how do you create space for your kids to have imagination, to how do I relate to this kid that I don't really understand, and like a whole bunch of topics. And the thing that really stuck out to me was that these weren't necessarily the first time I had heard these things from men in general, but it was clear to me that we weren't talking. Like, people were realizing that these were things they wanted to discuss, but they weren't even discussing it amongst each other. And so that's like the key thing here that I want people to take away, is that it is so critically important for men to be talking to other men, because at the very least, you will find some tip or trick that helps you do a thing that you are responsible for. If you are responsible for your money in the household, talking to other men will help you figure out ways to be more responsible for your money. If you are trying to figure out how to rekindle the romance in your marriage, talking to other men will help you do that. If you are trying to figure out how to not be such an angry father so that every time your kids do something that frustrates you or upset you, you are approaching it not with rage and like sternness, but with like at least a delicacy and understanding to help guide them to a learning experience, talking to other men will help with that. But we don't do it. I'll speak for myself. Over the years, I've been conditioned to not be an angry black man, right? Not be a scary black man. So I try to be happy-go-lucky, and you know, my like I inherited from my dad a very like angry face by like resting, just like my wife likes to call it, a resting angry face. That's true, I do have that. That's like just who I am. I'm thinking and I look angry, but I've been conditioned not to be that way. I've been conditioned to not cry. I've been conditioned to power through every time I feel like I don't have it, right? Like it's funny because like I had this situation last night where I was sick. I had like a temperature and I was trying to decide if I should go to an event. And I told my wife, I was like, look, normally I know I can power through this. I know I can do what I need to do. Drink some Pedialyte, get some Gatorade, have some coffee, a couple of Advil, power through it. And then I was going to come home and crash. But then I was like, should I do that, right? So I know we can do that. We can do these things. That's what I was conditioned to do. But I was missing out on like the other leg of the stool, right? If one leg of the stool is compartmentalization and having the ability to execute in spite of how you're feeling, in spite of fear, in spite of the things that emotionally may slow us down, the other leg of that stool is processing that stuff so that it doesn't cause downstream issues. I'll give you another example. So my father was pretty consistently like, when I would be around him, his only reaction to stuff would be anger. If he was scared about something, he would be angry at it. So like when I told him that I was going to be an entrepreneur, I was like leaving this good job and I was going to start being like I was going to pursue launching this business. He was like, well, I don't understand why you're doing that. That's ridiculous. You know, you got this good job and you didn't do this and don't do that. And that's, you know, it's not the risk, it's not the right time. And just like came at me with bluster. And this had been our cycle for a long time, right? And from his example, I learned that a man should be angry. That's okay. But I was like, at this point, I think, man, I was like late 20s, early 30s, something like that. And so I had a little bit of emotional training. I see that Paris is in the chat and she mentioned how important therapy is. That is accurate. So accurate. I had done some therapy at the time. So I had this feeling that he was actually just speaking to me from a place of fear because as my father, he was fearful for his son. And so I spoke to that indirectly and I was like, look, man, what if this was God's calling to me and he wants me to walk this path? And that shut him up. He was like, well, I can't argue with that. I was like, I know you can't argue with that. And it was a rational way to speak to a emotional fear that he was not articulating. Now, if he had said, son, you know what? Like, I'm not going to lie to you. I'm worried about this decision. And here's why, but I'm really scared about it. And then we could have a conversation from that place. And I could say, you know what, Dad? Like, I understand that. Tell me why. Here are the things that I've done in my life and my career. And I've made decisions in line with some level of logic that's led me to success. So can you just trust me in this moment? Like where I don't have to prove to you that my judgment is real. Like, can you just support me? I could have had that conversation, but we didn't because he didn't do the work on himself to understand the emotional baggage he had that prevented him from saying, I'm scared for this decision for you. And so the responsibility, the onus was on me to figure out like what was going on with him and then talk to it, then speak to it, and deal with it. And so I did. But I only had anger as a tool. So then my daughter recently was, she was like doing something. I honestly don't even remember what it was, but it was getting on my nerves and I was a little sick. So my patient level my patience level was low. I just was like angry with her and I was like, you need to be doing this thing better. Like, just why do I have to keep telling you about this? And I recognized afterwards that I had this pit in my stomach from the interaction. I was like, oh man, like I was being reactive in that situation. And so I went to talk to her after and I was like, hey, you know what? I'm sorry that I had that outburst with you. I was feeling this. I'm tired and I'm a little stressed. And, like I just don't like, this situation's making me feel a little frustrated with you. And that's not fair. I shouldn't be angry at you about that. I recognize you need help with this thing. So let me help you. And she hugged me. Because she appreciated that I came back to her with it, even though she's like, doesn't have the words for it. She could feel it. Like that generational inheritance could very easily have just created another wound in my kid if I had not done the work to recognize it in myself and then address it in the moment. That work, that appreciation, that support, that like change in approach has come from me interacting with other people. It's come from me talking to other men who are more in touch with their own emotional state. And I've seen them, or they've given me tools to process and like engage with kids in this moment. Like I bring this anger to some of my friends and I'm like, yo, hey, this is what I've been doing. I don't feel right about it, but I don't know how to do it differently. And then they'll be like, oh, well, like, here's what's going on with you. How are you feeling? It sounds like you're feeling this. Let's talk about it a little bit more. Here's some things I do to help in that situation. Maybe you can try it. And it worked. So y'all are lonely because you're doing it to yourselves. Like men are lonely because they're keeping themselves boxed in with this mentality, these ideals of manhood that are no longer and never really have served us in being successful. Successful men work with other people. There's really no such thing as a self-made man, right? We are all dependent upon other people. My pastor in New York used to say, your success is locked up in other people. And that's true regardless of the topic. And so if you accept that, then you need to accept that you got to talk to other people. You got to open up. But hey, Brian, you're like, how do I do that? That seems scary. It seems like really hard. I get it. Like I have a section here to talk about it. So we're going to talk about it. So look, as I mentioned, like I got tools and examples and help from other men. I've brought things to them, then they've said, hey, here are some things that you can try. So I was like, all right, cool. For this discussion today, I thought there are a few things that you could try to help you open up to other men. So for all you lonely ass men out there who hopefully are feeling it and recognizing that you shouldn't be doing this thing alone, whether it's being a man, whether it's being a husband, whether it's being a father, or even being a son, you don't need to do it alone, right? There are other people out there that can support you through this. Right? If you're not comfortable with emotion, here are some suggestions on how to get comfortable. All right. First thing, tell somebody. Just tell them. And I know you might be thinking, oh, you want me to tell somebody I'm lonely? I mean, honestly, yes, like you should do that. But if you're not comfortable doing that explicitly, you could just text someone and say, hey man, I'd love to hang out with you. I haven't hung out with you in a while. I really miss kicking it. Let's get up, right? Get a beer, go hit some golf balls, ride your bike, whatever the thing is you do. But just tell somebody that you'd like to spend time with them. And I guarantee you that person's going to be like, yeah, let's do that. I'd love to do that. I haven't hung out with you in a while. I'll tell you, man, like I have to do that a lot as a parent because I fall off the map, man. I miss one of my buddies, Brian Henry. He's a musical illustrator, a DJ, and an event. He produces great events as well as produces music. And he's invited me to a bunch of different things. And I feel so bad because I will have every intention of going and then something takes me out. I get sick, childcare issues come up. Whatever, like classic parenting things. I want to be there, but I can't. So I have to tell him, hey man, like I want to spend time with you. I want to see you. Can you let me know when you come around, when you have this, when you have that, I'll make myself available. I have to come more than 50% because frankly, I've been off the map. And so I want him to feel like I can, I'm still interested in hanging out with him. So you should say something to somebody. Right. Another thing that I would suggest is journaling how you feel so that you're ready to talk about it when you see someone. So I think I mentioned one of the last episodes that I have this weekly call with a buddy and we've had it for years. And we recently, when I hit my 10-year mark in my marriage, we both were kind of talking to each other about man, I really appreciate you that you saved my marriage. We said that to each other. Part of that was we are adept and practiced at communicating how we're feeling about situations in our marriage so that we can talk to each other about it. And then I'll tell him how I'm feeling about something. And then he'll be like, oh, well, does that really mean this? And then we'll process through it. But I didn't come to that by myself. Like my wife and I have done couples counseling for years, and that taught me how to start processing these feelings into words so that I could get help from other people. And so like I'll write out a situation like this happened, and then I'll write like that made me feel blah, 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 blah. And then I'll write like, well, I would like it to go this way, or I'm mad at them and I'd like want them to go away or whatever. I'll just get it all out. And 9 times out of 10, I'll look at it on paper and be like, this is ridiculous. Like this is, I'm being ridiculous. I'm scared. I'm frustrated. I'm grieving. I'm disappointed, whatever. Or I'll see another framing of the situation and the experience in a way that helps me understand like, oh, maybe I don't need to be mad about it. I'm maybe missing my wife or somebody else's perspective on this. But writing it out helps so when you go get that beer with a buddy, you can say, oh man, you know what? I have been feeling whatever your journal says. I haven't talked to my wife in a while. We haven't gone on dates and I feel sad about that. If that's as far as you get, I promise you the other person will be like, oh man, that sucks. I feel the same way, or I've had an experience like that. Let's talk more about it. It just cracks the door open, but you have to do the work to practice a little bit to be able to articulate that. So write it down. And last thing is practice opening up in small ways with other people, and specifically asking for help or like venting, like showing that vulnerability, that emotion. And so like an example of this might be talking to somebody who you feel safe about their opinion. You feel like, we can talk and we're safe in this space, and just saying like, hey, I'm not happy right now in my marriage. Or that might feel like a big one. You could just say like, you know what, I've been feeling really down lately. That might be an easier one. And you can pull on, they might pull on the thread, or they might just say, hey, what would be helpful to make you feel less down? Cool. Or you could say like, hey, ask them for their opinion on something, right? And it could be like basic, like, hey, I'm thinking about starting a gym, going on a diet. And just like get in the habit of seeking others' opinions. And then to take it a step further, act on the advice, right? Like if they tell you, oh, you don't need to go on this fancy diet, what you really just need to do is eat whole foods, stop having so much Chick-fil-A and fast food, stop having sauces on your foods, and cut out the desserts. And just do that for a month and just see how your body reacts. Which, by the way, like I'm speaking to myself. Like I know that's what I need to do. But that in and of itself, like it just invites help, right? It shows that you are vulnerable and willing to be coached, and then gets you the help you need. And once you get comfortable with that, then you can build on it, right? You can build on it to, oh, I'm struggling with this in my marriage. Oh, like my kid is not responding to the way I discipline them. And like figuring that out together becomes possible. But it starts with something small, right? And so if I know that you are willing to listen to the advice I'm giving you from a lived experience on a small thing, then I know that when you bring something big to me, I can really put my energy into it, because it won't be a waste of time. It won't be like you're asking for my opinion and then I'm like talking about what you should do, and then you just ignore it and go off and do something completely irrational because you don't want to concede that you need the help, right? I now know that you're willing to listen, so I will give you what you need to hear. So practice something small. Those are my tips, man. Like, I just feel like y'all need to talk to people. Men be not talking to people, and it's just ridiculous. I got this question in the chat that says, can you talk about what happened to my relationships when I was vulnerable? So I think that's a good question to close on. What can happen for you if you try these small tips and actually start to become more vulnerable? Let me tell you a story. Before I started dating my now wife, I had just gone through this breakup. It was like, a couple of years relationship, great woman. We weren't a fit. I was sitting with I used to call them friend girls, like my platonic girlfriends. We were having lunch, and I was trying to process the emotions and experience in partnership with her. I was probably doing that because I didn't feel comfortable processing my emotions with a man. So I was living this nonsense that I was just talking about. Anyway. So I was talking to her, and she asked me this question of like, what is it like? What do you want, right? Like in a long-term partner? And I was like, I want somebody that I can be with forever, that I can be in partnership with, that I can depend on, and have as an advisor. I can advise them, and we can really be connected and supported over the long term. And she's like, all right, well, like what's been holding you back from that? And so I thought about the last few people I dated, and I felt that there was always something I had over them. Like I was like better professionally, or, had this other thing over them or whatever. And so there was a power imbalance. And I said this to her, I was like, I think to be successful in a long-term relationship like that, I need to be with someone that I feel comfortable being fully vulnerable with. And I historically have not dated someone that I could be vulnerable with and I maintained power over to protect myself because I was avoiding that. And she's like, well, why? And I was like, well, because if you're fully vulnerable with somebody, they can hurt you. They can hurt you the worst of anybody that can hurt you. And I was like, and then I had this epiphany moment where I was like, oh man, I can only think of one person that I would feel comfortable doing that with. And it was my wife. I guess the long-winded way of answering that question is you could get married and be in a long-term relationship where you're really happy over the long term. So I think that's one example. The other example I think I could think of, let me use this weekly call I have with my buddy as an example. So I have a weekly call with one of my best friends, and we probably make 70% of them, if I'm being honest. He gets busy, I get busy, shit happens. But we use that time to talk about as much as possible. How are you doing? How are you feeling right now? What's going on with your business? How is that making you feel? How's your stress level going? How's your marriage? How's your relationship with your kids? Have you done anything for yourself? Are you sleeping? We talk about all this stuff. It's not a checklist every day, but we try to cover as much of it as possible over time. And what that has done for me personally over time, our relationship has gotten better. So I don't see him but for once or twice a year, but I feel closer to him. I feel like somebody out there cares enough about me and knows me well enough to have my back. They're also able to pick up on when I'm out of alignment with my day-to-day life, that he can be like, something's wrong, man. Are you okay? And I might not even recognize it, but somebody else has been able to recognize it, and then they'll reflect it back to me and then I'll be like, oh man, you're right. I'm off. I'm feeling stressed about this thing, or I'm carrying a lot of anger about something that just happened or whatever. And in the I'm going to say best or worst of times, ask me the real questions that force me to confront something that I need to decide on. Hey, are you done with your marriage? Obviously I wasn't, but I needed that question to be asked because the frustration and the anger and stuff was building to a point where it seemed like I might be at a point where I needed to decide that, and I decided to keep choosing the marriage. But he asked me that, and I remember that. I remember him asking me that very clearly, and I thought about it for 30 seconds, then I was like, no, I'm not done. But that created a window into myself that allowed him to see me well enough to support me in the ways that I need. And even throughout the sabbatical that I was on, I was burned out. I wasn't feeling a lot of confidence in my ability to do things. I was just I don't know anything about business. I was kind of in a depressive state and also just very tired. And he was one of the only people that constantly was just building me up. He was you're capable of great things. The world deserves what you have to give it. You can do national or international level things. Just keep believing that. He knew where I was and was then speaking into that thing. So I don't feel lonely because I at least have that relationship. And by the way, that's not my only friendship where I'm open like that. I have different flavors of that relationship with different people, but they exist, right? And I talk to people, and I talk to men in particular and other married men with kids about what's going on with me as a married man with kids. And that creates this support foundation, this scaffolding into which I can grow and continue to get better. And you know what? I don't get it all right. I definitely don't. I don't get it all right. But I have other brothers, uncles, types that can help guide me back to the right path. And I have people with whom I can feel safe enough to be open and vulnerable with, so I can get the emotion and the frustration and whatever baggage I have out and come back to my marriage, my friends, my business, my kids, and be the best that they all need me to be. So that's the benefit of having some openness and vulnerability here. And there's a lot more to dig into that. But if you hear nothing else, I've said this maybe 15 times, but if you hear nothing else, I want you to open up to at least one other person, because 1 in 5 men have gotten emotional support recently. And that is absurd. So don't be one of the 4 men who don't. Reach out, ask for help, spend time with other people, and talk about real things. Don't just talk about sports. Don't just talk about your work and my promotion. Talk about what's going on with you. What are you angry about? What makes you excited? What has made you scared or grieve lately? Open that stuff up and share it, because I guarantee you will find camaraderie and community once you do. That's my self-made dad for today. I appreciate y'all coming through. The chat was super active. Thank you. And with that, have a great day, gang. Peace.